welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Our focus continues to be on the escalating Israel-Hamas war. Now, as Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Gaza relentlessly, the death toll in the blockaded enclave has crossed 2,700. Over 1,000 of those killed were children. More than 9,700 others have been wounded. The Palestinian Health Ministry says at least another 1,000 dead bodies are buried under the rubble of collapsed buildings. More than 1 million residents of Gaza have been internally displaced. Under a total siege imposed by Tel Aviv, Gaza is running out of food, water, fuel and medical supplies. With Israel massing tens of thousands of troops along its border with Gaza and 400,000 reservists being called up, all indications are that Israel is gearing up for a ground invasion of Gaza. Most believe it's no longer a question of if, but when. The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, has publicly stated that they are ready to enter Gaza and are now waiting for the government to take a political decision. Israel announced today that Hamas terrorists are holding 199 hostages in Gaza. While most of them are Israelis, there are also many foreigners among them, including American and British nationals. Israel also announced a humanitarian corridor in southern Gaza to facilitate the safe passage of foreigners trapped there. Meanwhile, in a significant statement, US President Joe Biden has said long-term Israeli occupation of Gaza would be a big mistake and that the territory should be governed by a Palestinian authority instead. In an interview with CBS News' 60 Minutes, Biden said, and I quote, "I think it would be a big mistake. What happened in Gaza, in my view, is that Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas do not represent all the Palestinian people." Adding that a majority of people who are suffering as a result of Hamas's actions are innocent Palestinians, Biden stressed on his belief that Israel would act by the rules of war and that innocent civilians would have access to medicines, food and water. This comes after strong criticism of Israel for imposing a total siege on Gaza and cutting off water, food and fuel supplies to 2.3 million people who reside there. Some experts believe the United States has taken note of the concerns expressed by the Palestinians in Gaza and the Arab world and is making efforts to prevent a further escalation of the conflict that has already taken too many lives. This even as the US continues to express unstinting support for Israel, that includes sending aircraft carriers and naval warships as well as other ammunition to that country. In fact, President Biden will visit Israel on Wednesday as a show of solidarity. The German Chancellor will visit Israel tomorrow. Earlier, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken held meetings with Saudi and Egyptian leaders, and reports suggest that Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has invited President Biden to an international conference to discuss the ongoing conflict. Palestinian and Israeli leaders have reportedly been pushing Egypt to help mediate the conflict, and the US has pushed Egypt to open the Rafah border crossing to get foreign nationals out of Gaza. As many wait for Israel to launch a ground assault, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened Israel's expanded emergency cabinet, which includes former opposition lawmakers. He said, and I quote, "Hamas thought we would be demolished. It is we who will demolish Hamas." Many have also wondered why Israel is delaying the ground offensive. Fact is, it is going to be a very complex military exercise for Israel, which also faces the daunting challenge of rescuing almost 200 hostages who are believed to be kept by the Hamas in tunnels and underground bunkers under Gaza. Experts caution that Israel will lose its firepower superiority and be forced to engage the enemy in close combat, as Gaza's intricate network of tunnels, known as the Gaza Metro, is a key factor in any offensive. Meanwhile, the Arab League and African Union have issued stark warnings about the dire consequences of an Israeli ground offensive, going as far as to say that a potential invasion would result in a genocide of unprecedented proportions. Iran has issued a threat, saying if the Zionist aggressions do not stop, the hands of all parties in the region are on the trigger. The Iranian foreign minister has singled out the United States for its unwavering backing of Israel since the devastating Hamas attacks that left at least 1,400 Israelis dead. In another development, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, has blasted some UN officials and severed ties with one who shook hands with an Iranian minister. The ambassadors accused United Nations of living under a rock and having blood on its hands. He thundered, the UN support for and legitimization of genocidal terrorists is a threat to civilization. The question now is the war set to escalate significantly with Israel's imminent ground assault? And how will the Arab world and the international community at large react to such an escalation?
עד כה התקנו 291 משפחות.
In Gaza, we are evacuating the population from Gaza City. We are moving the population south to Nahal Aza. The evacuation continues. By now, hundreds of thousands have already been evacuated. Residents of Gaza City, I call on you again. Hamas is trying to prevent your evacuation. We will allow it to the south. Get out of Gaza City and all the surrounding area for your personal safety. Move south to Nahal Aza. In this area, there are conditions that will allow you to survive. We have so far informed 286 families of IDF fallen soldiers, bereaved families. We also solemnly informed 126 families of missing persons and abductees. So far, we have notified 291 families of soldiers killed. We embrace the bereaved families. We have notified the families of 199 hostages. There's an effort and top national priority on the issue of hostages, and we are focused on that effort as a top national priority. We continue gathering more information on the hostages and operational internal channels and are in continuous contact with the families. The IDF is working around the clock to return the hostages, and the IDF and the State of Israel are doing this.
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary.
Propositions of Iranian involvement in the Israel-Palestine conflict have political and illusory motives and are an attempt to divert public opinion away from the unequivocal support of the United States to the Zionist regime in the ongoing attacks against the oppressed nation in Gaza.
It's important in these circumstances to start at the beginning and repeat that Israel has the right to defend itself against the monstrosity of Hamas and the danger it represents. Its response must be firm, it must be just, it must be strong. It will be strong if it is just. It will be just if it complies with international law, and in particular, international humanitarian law and safeguards civilian populations.
The humanitarian situation is one which, of course, we're concerned about and that I've raised in all the calls and interactions I've had with other leaders from across the region, and in particular, making sure that we can try and get the Rafah crossing open. That will ease the humanitarian situation. That's why I prioritised speaking with President Sisi of Egypt early on last week to talk about that, and we will continue to do everything we can to alleviate the humanitarian situation on the ground, including moving some of our Raw Navy assets into the region who can provide further support as required.
More than 2,808 martyrs and more than 11,000 wounded. These are people each with a story and a life, and members of a civilized population with a history and a future. They are not human animals, as the occupation leaders say, but our people will not surrender.
We're living in the worst of times. The first thing I want to emphasize is the unacceptable, illegal act to take those hostages from Israel, many of whom, for God's sake, are children, women, old and sick, and keep them hidden in Gaza against some future eventuality. They have to be let out straight away. Number two, a response to that egregious act also includes humanitarian rules of war. You cannot ask people to move out of harm's way without assisting them to do it, to go to places of their choice where they want to be safe and with the humanitarian aid that they need to make that journey safely. And right now, the movement that has happened has not had those provisions, and it must have it. Hospitals are running out of fuel, are running out of supplies up in the north. People can't move without help.
Hamas is an enemy, but not just of Israel. Hamas is an enemy of all peace-loving Palestinian people who are left to pay a devastating price for this terrorism. Hamas honours no faith. It serves no cause but terror. It is no better than any other group in history that has clung to the twisted belief that victory can be built on the blood of the innocent.
Sometimes, in an uncanny way, real life meets real life, almost blurring the lines between the two. That seems to be the case for the Israeli stars of the popular television and web series Fodder, a spy thriller that's also a slice of life, with the Israel-Palestine conflict being at the heart of the story. Two of the leading Fodder actors have in fact joined the Israeli